The sound of rain hitting the windows filled the conference room as my grandfather's lawyer cleared his throat. Dozens of family members sat in silence, waiting for him to speak. The air felt thick, heavy with perfume, sweat, and greed. I sat in the back, pressed between my parents, wishing I could disappear. My grandfather, Cornelius Ashford, had passed away just a week ago, and now his entire $500 million fortune was about to be read out loud. I had no idea that what he left behind would destroy my family and change my life forever. Mr. Quinton, my grandfather's lawyer, adjusted his glasses and began to read. His voice was quiet at first, trembling a little. I, Cornelius James Ashford, being of sound mind and body, leave my entire estate, valued at approximately $500 million, to the family member who finds the golden key. For a few seconds no one moved. Then the room erupted like a bomb had gone off. My cousin Bryce, tall and confident, jumped up from his chair and shouted, "I'll search the whole state if I have to." His voice echoed through the room as people started shouting, arguing, demanding explanations. My Aunt Veronica gasped. My Uncle Harlan turned red, slamming his hand on the table. "A treasure hunt? This is insane," he shouted. "My father built an empire, not some damn game." But I stayed silent. Because deep down I knew my grandfather better than any of them. He wasn't playing games. He was teaching a lesson, one last test for a family that had forgotten what mattered. I looked at his portrait hanging behind the lawyer, that same confident smile, those sharp blue eyes that always seemed to see through people. He was still controlling the room even in death. The chaos around me grew louder. My cousin Molly had her phone out, live-streaming the whole thing to her followers. "You guys, this is literally history in the making," she whispered into her camera. My Uncle Harlan's voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Quinton, what kind of nonsense is this?" he barked. The lawyer raised a trembling hand. "Please," he said, "there's more." He explained that the key was real, that Grandpa had left a notarized photo of it, a small golden key with the number 1408 engraved on it. No maps, no clues, no hints. The key could be anywhere among his properties. The shouting grew worse. Some people stormed out to start searching right away. Others stayed to argue. I glanced at my father. He was calm, quiet, just staring at the portrait of Grandpa. "Of course he did this," he muttered under his breath. My mother touched his arm, whispering, "Dennis, we should go." But I couldn't move. I watched my family, people who once sang together on Christmas Eve, now turning on each other like wild animals. And I had no idea that this was only the beginning. We left the law office after almost everyone else had stormed out, but the shouting still echoed in my head. I could hear Bryce outside, barking orders into his phone, already hiring a team of treasure hunters. Molly was recording herself again, saying, "This is the craziest thing ever. A real-life golden key worth $500 million. Her camera light flickered as she smiled into it, pretending she wasn't shaking with excitement. My father held the door open for my mother and me. "Let's go home," he said quietly. "This circus isn't for us." The three of us stepped out into the cold October rain. My mother tightened her coat, her wedding ring cold against my hand as she held it. My father didn't say a word the entire drive back. I watched the streets of Milwaukee blur past the window, the city lights reflecting in puddles. My grandfather's world, his mansions, his companies, his power, felt a million miles away from our small house in Bayview. When we got home, the smell of my mother's pot roast filled the kitchen. The roof leaked a little near the corner, and the garage door made that same old creaking noise when my father closed it. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Bought without a single cent of Ashford money. We ate dinner quietly that night. My father finally sighed and said, "Your grandfather was a complicated man. He didn't believe in handouts. Everything had to be earned." I nodded slowly. "He always said loyalty mattered more than money," I said. My mother looked at me curiously. "What makes you think of that now?" I didn't know how to explain it, but something about that the golden key, the chaos, felt like a message. "I think he's trying to teach us something," I said. "Something about who we are when we want something too much." My father gave a small smile, tired but proud. "Then maybe you're the only one who'll understand his lesson." The next few weeks turned our family into something unrecognizable. Uncle Harlan turned his mansion into mission control. He hired a team of private investigators, researchers, even people who used to work for Grandpa. They dug through every property record, every business file, every travel log, looking for a clue. 17 properties across 3 states, I heard him say in a news clip. "The key has to be in one of them." Bryce went bigger. He hired a company that specialized in finding lost art and buried treasure. They arrived at Grandpa's estate with metal detectors, scanners, even ground-penetrating radar. I drove by one Sunday and saw them tearing up Grandpa's rose garden, digging holes like madmen. Bryce was yelling, "Careful. That could be it." They dug for an hour before pulling up a rusty septic tank lid. He looked crushed, then furious. Meanwhile, Molly was making daily videos. Day 7, still no key. Her followers flooded her comments with theories. One even claimed the key was hidden inside Grandpa's casket. When Bryce tried to get permission to open the grave, my father slammed his fist on the table. "This is sick," he said. "Dad's probably rolling in his grave already." But no one cared about morals anymore. The hunt had begun and nothing was going to stop it. By the 3rd month, the entire Ashford family had turned into something out of a bad reality show. Everyone was obsessed, desperate, losing sleep and sanity over the golden key. Uncle Harlan had hired 15 investigators, each assigned to dig into different parts of Grandpa's life. They searched business records, travel logs, even medical reports, hoping for a hint about where he might have hidden the key. He held family meetings where charts and maps covered every wall, lines drawn from one property to another like a crime investigation board. Bryce's approach was louder, more expensive, and much more chaotic. He had turned Grandpa's mansion into a treasure site, with hired experts carrying machines that scanned walls, floors, and soil. I watched from my car one afternoon as men with headsets and metal detectors moved around the garden, stepping carefully over flower beds Grandpa had once tended with his own hands. Bryce's voice cut through the air, impatient, angry. "Keep going. It has to be here." Every small beep made him rush over, hoping to uncover gold, only to find an old pipe or a nail. He'd curse, throw his gloves, then start over again. The more they searched, the more they lost themselves. Bryce had stopped going to work. His girlfriend left after he tried to convince her to invest her savings into search technology. Uncle Harlan barely slept. Aunt Veronica had started drinking more than usual, whispering that the family was cursed. And Molly, she was the worst of all. Her treasure hunt vlogs had gone viral. Every day she'd post videos titled, "Searching Grandpa's Secret Basement," or "Could This Be the Key?" Millions were watching her fake smiles and edited tears. She even staged discoveries with planted objects, pretending she was close to finding it. When the truth came out, her followers turned on her. "You're using your grandfather's death for views," one comment said. She cried on camera and the video got over 5 million views. Meanwhile, my father and mother stayed away from it all. "Let them ruin themselves," Dad said one night, turning off the TV after seeing yet another news report about the Ashfords. "Your grandfather tried to warn us. Money doesn't change people, it shows who they really are." I nodded, but I couldn't stop thinking about Grandpa. Every Sunday I went to his grave like always. I brought fresh flowers, trimmed the grass, and talked to him quietly. "They're tearing each other apart, Grandpa," I'd whisper. "Maybe that's what you wanted, to show them who they've become." The cemetery became my escape. It was peaceful there, silent. The marble headstones didn't argue or lie. I'd sit on the cold bench near Grandpa's grave and think about all the stories he used to tell me, how he built everything from nothing, how loyalty meant more to him than profit. I realized I was the only one still visiting him just to visit. I didn't know it then, but those quiet Sundays were guiding me straight to the truth. The key wasn't hidden in his mansion or his office, or some secret vault in another state. It was right where I'd been sitting all along. By month 6, the hunt had gone completely out of control. Nobody in the Ashford family trusted anyone anymore. People who once hugged at Christmas now accused each other of theft and lies. Uncle Harlan had security cameras installed in all of Grandpa's old properties, convinced someone had already found the key and was hiding it. He even hired private investigators to follow other family members. "Dennis has it," he told his assistants, meaning my dad. He was always Dad's favorite. "This is his way of making sure the weak son gets everything." My father heard about the rumors but didn't respond. "Let him think what he wants," he said calmly, sipping his coffee. "I haven't set foot in any of Dad's houses since the funeral, and I'm not about to start now." My mother nodded quietly beside him, though I could see the pain in her eyes. It hurt her to watch her husband's family tear him down like that, all because he refused to join their madness. Meanwhile, the rest of them kept digging. Cousin Derek, who used to run a small tech startup, had returned from California with boxes of computers and scanners. He said he built a database that tracked every single place Grandpa had ever visited, linking it to dates like birthdays, anniversaries, and company milestones. He called it the Ashford Map. The key will be somewhere meaningful, he told me proudly, showing me color-coded spreadsheets like this was a science project. The day he opened his first pharmacy. His wedding anniversary. Even the day you were born. It's all connected. Then there was Aunt Nain, who went completely spiritual. She hired a psychic named Madame Zelda, claiming she could speak to Grandpa's spirit. They held candlelit seances in Grandpa's study, chanting and burning sage while the psychic claimed she sensed golden energy near certain walls. Every time she said that, they broke through plaster or dug into the floor. They never found anything, but the psychic kept coming back, paid in cash each time. By month 9, my family was unrecognizable. Bryce had spent almost $500,000 on treasure hunters, archaeologists, and technology. His apartment looked like a crime scene from a detective show. Walls covered in maps, red strings connecting dates and locations, piles of documents everywhere. He barely slept, and when I went to check on him one evening, he looked terrible. His eyes were red, his hands shaking. "I'm close," he muttered, pointing at a map. He had a cabin in Michigan nobody knows about. "I found the deed. That's where the key is." "I know it." I didn't argue. I just felt sorry for him. Molly had gone the other way. Her fame had exploded. She hit 1 million followers, and a streaming service offered her a deal for a reality show. But it came at a price. She couldn't sleep. She was on anxiety pills. I watched one of her live streams where she broke down crying because a clue turned out fake. "He's playing with us from the grave," she sobbed to her camera. And through all of it, I kept going to the cemetery every Sunday. Rain, snow, or sun, it didn't matter. I was the only one who still visited Grandpa just to talk to him, not to look for something. I thought I was just keeping a promise. I didn't realize I was walking straight toward the secret he'd left for me all along. The first anniversary of Grandpa's death was coming up. A full year of chaos, greed, and heartbreak, and not a single person had found the golden key. The family that once celebrated every holiday together was now divided into broken pieces. Some weren't even speaking to each other anymore. Lawsuits had started flying. Uncle Harlan sued 3 family members, accusing them of hiding the key. Bryce was drinking heavily, and Molly had practically vanished from public view after a public meltdown on her live stream. It was like the golden key had cursed us all. But my life had stayed mostly the same. I was still teaching 5th graders at McKinley Elementary, still driving my old car, still living in the same house with my parents. Every Sunday I went to Riverside Cemetery. It had become a ritual: fresh flowers, a thermos of coffee, and quiet conversation with Grandpa. I'd tell him about work, about my girlfriend Rachel, and about how crazy everyone else had gotten. The caretakers at the cemetery even knew me by name. "Back again?" one of them, old Carl, would say, tipping his cap. That second Sunday in October, something felt different. The air had that sharp chill that comes before fall truly sets in. The maple trees were turning gold and red, just like Grandpa used to love. I brought his favorite meal from Romano's Deli, pastrami on rye with extra mustard, and a cup of his favorite dark roast coffee. I even brought along the chess set he'd given me on my 16th birthday, the one with hand-carved ivory and jade pieces. It had always been our thing, chess and coffee on Sundays. I set the board on the flat surface of his headstone and started to play alone. I moved each piece carefully, playing both sides. "Remember this one, Grandpa?" I whispered. "The Sicilian defense, you said it's like life. Be patient. Think ahead. Don't let pride blind you." The wind rustled the leaves, and for a moment, it almost felt like he was sitting across from me again. I smiled, finishing the game with a pawn promotion just like he had taught me. "You always said the weakest piece could become the strongest," I murmured. "You were right." As I reached to pack up the chessboard, my hand brushed against something rough under the edge of the headstone. I frowned and leaned closer. It looked like a tiny strip of tape, gray, perfectly matched with the granite. My heart started to pound. I pulled it back gently, and there it was. A small golden key glinting in the sunlight. 2 inches long, engraved with the numbers 1408. For a long moment I couldn't breathe. I just stared, frozen. Then I noticed the small laminated note attached to it. It said, "For my faithful visitor," see, my name. My hands were shaking as I held it. It was real. The key everyone had been chasing for a year was here, under my hands, under the grave I'd cleaned every week. And somehow I knew Grandpa had planned it this way all along. He knew who would come back, who would keep showing up. I sat there on the grass for what felt like hours, the key heavy in my palm, the truth sinking in. He didn't leave a fortune for whoever was smartest or richest. He left it for whoever cared the most. My phone felt slippery in my hand as I dialed my parents. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely get the words out. "Mom," I whispered, "I found it." There was silence for a few seconds, then my father's voice came through. "Where are you?" "At the cemetery," I said. It was under his headstone, taped there the whole time. My father didn't even sound surprised. "Don't tell anyone," he said firmly. "Come home. We'll figure this out together." I sat there for a moment longer, staring at the key glinting in the autumn light. It looked simple, just a small piece of gold with the number 1408, but holding it felt like holding fire. That number kept running through my head. 1408. A safety deposit box key maybe? Grandpa had always banked at First National downtown. By the time I drove home, my palms were sweaty and cold at the same time. My parents were waiting in the living room, curtains drawn, the old coffee table between them. When I placed the key down, it caught the lamplight and filled the room with a dull golden glow. My mother was the first to speak. "We could keep it quiet," she said softly. "Wait a few months, pretend you found it somewhere else. The family doesn't have to know." My father shook his head. "That's not what your grandfather wanted. This was a test and now it's time to finish it." I looked at the key again. "It's probably a safety deposit key," I said. "Box number 1408. If I don't go to the bank, I'll never know what's inside." My mother's hand trembled as she reached for my father's. "What if it's dangerous?" He gave her a small smile. "Cornelius didn't do anything without purpose. If he left that key for our son, he meant for him to use it." That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grandpa's handwriting on that little note, "For my faithful visitor." The words echoed in my mind like a heartbeat. The next morning, I put on my only suit, the one I wore for interviews and funerals, and drove downtown to First National Bank. The building looked exactly as I remembered: tall marble pillars, brass doors, and that old-fashioned silence you only find in banks that have existed for generations. "Can I help you, sir?" the manager asked. "Yes," I said, pulling the key from my pocket. "I think this belongs here. Box 1408. He examined it closely, then nodded. "One of our oldest boxes. Mr. Ashford had it since 1963. He looked up at me, curious. "You must be family." He led me through 3 heavy security doors and down a long hallway to the vault. The air was cold, dry, and smelled faintly of metal. Hundreds of small brass boxes lined the walls like golden drawers of secrets. Box 1408 was near the floor. My hands shook as I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The click echoed like a thunderclap in the silence. The manager helped me lift it out. It was heavier than I expected. He set it on the table in the viewing room, nodded politely, and left me alone. For a long time I just stared at it. That small, ordinary-looking box that held my family's entire story. I took a deep breath, counted to 3 and opened the lid. Inside the metal box lay stacks of old $100 bills, bundled neatly with faded paper bands. The rubber had dried and cracked, and the paper smelled faintly of dust and time. Each bundle had a set of initials written in black ink, VD, followed by dates that stretched back to the early 1960s. My stomach turned. I didn't know what I was looking at, but it didn't feel right. Beneath the money was a small leather-bound journal, the kind my grandfather used to keep when he traveled. Its pages were yellowed and fragile, but his handwriting was unmistakable, bold, slanted, precise. I opened to the first page and my heart started to race as I read. "Vincent D'Angelo came to my pharmacy today. He knows I've been skimming from the register to pay for Maria's cancer treatment. He says he'll report me unless I help him." I frowned. Vincent D'Angelo. The name was familiar. Then it hit me, Vincent "Vinny Diamonds" D'Angelo, the notorious Milwaukee crime boss who'd vanished decades ago. He'd been in every crime documentary, every book about the Midwest mob. Everyone thought he'd been killed in the early 70s. I turned the page and my throat went dry. "He's making me launder money through the business. If I refuse, he says Maria will have an accident. I have no choice." Each entry got darker, more desperate. The journal documented everything, every payment, every meeting, every threat. Grandpa had been trapped, forced to run his pharmacy as a front for the mob. As I kept reading, my pulse hammered in my ears. When Vinny D'Angelo supposedly died in 1971, Grandpa had written, "Vinny says he's leaving town. He wants me to handle the payments while he stays dead. He's not gone. He's hiding and I'm the one keeping him safe." 50 years. Grandpa had been paying off a ghost for 50 years. I flipped to the last few pages. The handwriting was shakier, the ink smudged. The final entry was dated just a month before he died. "I'm done hiding. I've gathered proof of everything. If my family is ever to be free, someone must find the key. They'll know what to do. The truth must come out. At the bottom of the box, under the journal, was a sealed envelope with a USB drive inside. Written on it in Grandpa's familiar cursive were the words, "Complete evidence for the FBI." My hands trembled. The air in the room felt heavy. I looked down at the cash again, not treasure, not inheritance, blood money. For a moment I couldn't move. I thought about everything the family had done, the fights, the lies, the greed, all chasing a fortune built on crime and silence. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice, calm and steady, "Loyalty, not money." I took out my phone, opened the dial pad and stared at the numbers for a few seconds. My reflection looked back at me in the metal lid, pale, sweating, terrified. Then I took a deep breath and pressed 911. When the dispatcher answered, my voice came out quieter than I expected but steady. "I need to report a crime," I said. "Actually, multiple crimes. I'm at First National Bank on Wisconsin Avenue. You're going to need to send detectives, and the FBI." I closed the box and waited. It didn't take long. Within an hour, the bank vault was filled with people in dark suits and earpieces. The low hum of radios, the sound of papers rustling, and the echo of shoes on marble filled the space. I sat at a small table while two FBI agents flipped through the journal. Their expressions changed from curiosity to disbelief to quiet horror. One of them, Agent Sarah Coleman, finally looked up at me. "You understand what you just handed us, right?" I nodded weakly. "I think so." My grandfather was blackmailed by Vincent D'Angelo. She exchanged a glance with her partner. Vincent D'Angelo didn't die in 1971. This proves he faked his death and lived under protection all these years. Your grandfather's records might be the key to dozens of unsolved cases: money laundering, racketeering, maybe even murder. I sat there in silence, still trying to process what she said. For my entire life, Grandpa had been a symbol of power and respect. He built a pharmaceutical empire. He was the man everyone admired. But the truth was darker. He had been living under the weight of someone else's crime for 50 years. They took everything: the money, the journal, the USB drive. I gave my statement, telling them about how I'd found the key, about the note, about my family tearing itself apart for something none of them understood. Agent Coleman wrote down every word carefully. When we were done, she closed her notebook and said softly, "Your grandfather wasn't a criminal. He was a victim who carried the guilt for a lifetime. You did the right thing." When I stepped outside, the sun was just beginning to set. The air was cool, the streets almost empty. I sat in my car and stared at the golden key in my hand, small, cold, and suddenly heavier than before. It no longer felt like a ticket to wealth. It felt like a confession. The next morning it was everywhere. "Pharmaceutical billionaire's secret life of extortion," the headlines said. Every major network covered it: CNN, NBC, even local stations ran the story for days. The FBI revealed everything: how Vincent D'Angelo had threatened Grandpa, how he'd hidden in plain sight for decades, how Grandpa's money had been partly built on blackmail and silence. My family reacted exactly as I feared. Uncle Harlan had a breakdown on live television. "He carried this alone," he said between sobs. "All these years, and we thought he was just being secretive." Bryce checked himself into rehab the same week. He told me later, "I spent a year chasing money that was never really ours." Mal Erie deleted every video, every photo, and posted one final message: "Sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie. But you can't heal without it." The chaos that had swallowed our family slowly quieted. For the first time in a year, nobody was fighting. Nobody was searching. Nobody was pretending. Grandpa's truth had broken us, but somehow, it was also putting us back together. A week later, I got a call from Mr. Quinton, Grandpa's lawyer. His voice sounded steadier this time. "Your grandfather left one final instruction," he said. "He deposited a second will with federal authorities. It was meant to be opened only if someone found the key and made the right choice." I sat there holding the phone, speechless as he continued, "They're going to read it tomorrow morning. You might want to be there." The next morning, I walked into the same law office where it had all started a year ago. The air felt different this time, still cold, still formal, but calmer, like the storm had finally passed. Only a handful of people were there: my parents, Uncle Harlan, Bryce, Mal Erie, and a few cousins who hadn't given up completely on the family name. Mr. Quinton greeted us with a small smile. "This won't take long," he said, placing a sealed envelope on the table. "Your grandfather prepared this second will years ago. He left it with the Department of Justice, to be released only if the person who found the golden key turned it in to the authorities rather than keeping it for themselves." Everyone's eyes turned to me. I could feel their stares, The same people who once fought over Grandpa's estate now looking at me with something new in their faces. Respect maybe. Or guilt. Mr. Quinton broke the seal and began to read. His voice was steady this time, stronger than I'd ever heard it. To my family. If you are hearing this, then someone among you has chosen truth over greed. The golden key was never meant to lead to riches, it was meant to lead to light. The fortune that remains, built through honest work, shall be divided equally among all of you. But there is one condition. Each of you must use your share to turn darkness into light, to help others rather than yourselves. Let this be our redemption. The room was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. For the first time in years there was no shouting, no accusations, no fake smiles. Just quiet. Mr. Quinton continued, explaining that after removing everything tied to D'Angelo's money laundering, Grandpa's legitimate businesses were still worth nearly $100 million. It wasn't $500 million, but it was clean, honest, and real. Grandpa had truly been brilliant even while carrying that burden. Uncle Harlan's hands trembled as he spoke. All those years, he said softly, Dad carried this secret alone. He protected us without saying a word. His voice cracked. And I called him a coward. Bryce looked down at the floor. He'd lost a lot in that year, money, pride, even himself. But in that moment he looked younger, calmer. I don't deserve a cent of it, he whispered. But I'll make sure it means something. Mallory wiped her eyes. I think I finally understand, she said. He wasn't punishing us. He was trying to save us. When the meeting ended, no one rushed out this time. We stayed and talked, really talked, for the first time in years. My father shared stories about Grandpa's early days, when he was just a small-town pharmacist who worked late hours to help sick neighbors. Mallory promised to use her platform for something good. Bryce hugged me before leaving, something I never thought he'd do again. That night as we drove home, my mother reached over and touched my shoulder. He left the key for you because you were the only one who remembered who he was, she said softly. Not the businessman. The man. I looked out the window at the dark Milwaukee skyline, the lights flickering across the river. For the first time in my life, the city didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. Like Grandpa's lesson had finally sunk in. Over the next few months, life began to change, slowly but meaningfully. The media frenzy faded. The news anchors moved on to other scandals, and the Ashford name stopped trending online. For once, that silence felt like a blessing. Grandpa's story had been told, the truth was out, and what remained was a family trying to rebuild something real. Each of us had to submit our plan for the light, as Grandpa called it, a proposal showing how we'd use our share of the money to do some good in the world. It wasn't about charity for the cameras or publicity stunts. The conditions in the will made it clear. If your plan was selfish, your share would be forfeited and added to a trust fund for causes that genuinely helped people. That was Grandpa. Even in death, he had a way of keeping everyone honest. Uncle Harlan was the first to submit his plan. He stood in front of the family and said, For years, I built wealth without caring who it hurt. My father paid the price for that. I'm done chasing numbers. His plan was to create a legal aid society for small business owners who were being threatened or blackmailed, people like Grandpa once was. It was approved immediately. Bryce's plan came next. He'd been sober for 3 months and was finally starting to look like himself again, though quieter. I'm creating a foundation for families hurt by organized crime, he said. For people who need protection, counseling, or a place to start over. When he looked at me, I could see a flicker of humility that hadn't been there before. I chased money my whole life, he admitted. Grandpa spent his running from it. Then came Mallory. She had deleted her social media months ago and had gone back to school to study social work. I want to create a program that helps kids who've lost parents to violence, she said softly. Because I know what it's like to lose someone to something bigger than you. She smiled faintly. And I think Grandpa would have liked that. Even the cousins who had once schemed and argued submitted real ideas. Funding rehab centers, opening community clinics, offering scholarships. It was strange, almost unbelievable, how the same greed that had divided us now seemed to be turning into purpose. As executor, it was my job to review every proposal. Mr. Quinton guided me through the process, but he said something one day that stuck with me. Your grandfather saw this in you, he said. Patience. Integrity. You were the only one who didn't try to dig up his grave for a payday. At home, my parents didn't want to take their share at first. We've lived fine without Ashford money, my father said. But I convinced them. Use it to build something that lasts, I told him. And so they did, A scholarship fund for students whose parents chose careers in education over profit. Let Grandpa's money create more teachers, I said. More people who believe that purpose matters. The house that had once felt so small now felt warm again. We ate dinner together, not in silence but in peace. There were no reporters outside, no angry phone calls, no talk of treasure hunts. Just us, the same family Grandpa had always wanted us to be. Every night before bed, I'd see the golden key on my desk. I'd kept it not as a trophy but as a reminder. It wasn't shiny anymore, the gold had dulled a little with time. But when the light hit it just right, it still gleamed, quiet, steady, honest. That was the inheritance Grandpa had really left behind. Not money. Not property. A lesson. By spring, everything finally felt lighter. The chaos, the greed, the madness, all of it had burned away, leaving behind something cleaner. For the first time in years, family dinners weren't battles. We laughed again. We shared stories about Grandpa without bitterness. It was strange how one truth could destroy everything and rebuild it at the same time. I visited the cemetery every Sunday just like before. It had become more than a habit, it was a promise. I'd bring a fresh cup of coffee and sometimes the same chess set, though now I didn't play both sides. I just talked to him. I told him about how things were changing, how his lesson had worked. They finally understand, Grandpa, I'd whisper. You did it. You made them see what matters. The new headstone had been placed a few weeks earlier. It was simple but beautiful, pale granite with clean edges and a line carved across the bottom. He bore his burden with grace and protected those he loved. I traced the words with my fingers every time I came. It felt right. After the funeral last year, I used to come here and feel angry at the chaos, the secrets, the way his death had broken us. But now all I felt was gratitude. He'd carried the weight of someone else's crime for 50 years, all to protect a family that didn't even know it needed protecting. And when he was gone, he left us the truth so we could finally be free. Sometimes I'd see other visitors nearby, people visiting their parents, their children, their friends, each lost in their own memories. I realized Grandpa's lesson wasn't just for us. It was universal. People chase money, power, and approval all their lives, but in the end, the things that really matter are simple: loyalty, honesty, and love. One afternoon, as I sat there with my coffee, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Bryce. He looked healthier, a little thinner, but calmer, steadier. He smiled faintly when our eyes met. I thought I'd find you here, he said, sitting down beside me. I started visiting every week too. Guess it's a habit now. I nodded. He'd like that. Bryce let out a breath and stared at the grave. You know, I used to think Grandpa wanted to punish us with that will. But he didn't. He wanted to save us from ourselves. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind move through the trees. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was sitting in a graveyard. I felt like I was sitting in a classroom, one where Grandpa was still teaching, still guiding, even from the other side. As Bryce stood to leave, he looked at me and said, "You were right that day in the office. It wasn't about finding the key. It was about who we'd become trying to find it." When he left, I stayed a little longer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the golden key. It was warm from my hand, faintly worn around the edges. I turned it over slowly, watching the light dance across the engraved numbers, 1408. "That's your legacy, Grandpa," I whispered. "Not the money. The meaning." The months kept passing, and the world slowly forgot about the Ashford family scandal. The news cycle moved on, the headlines faded, and strangers stopped whispering when I walked by. But inside our family, something had quietly shifted forever. The walls that used to divide us were gone. The phone calls that used to be about business or competition were now about real things. Birthdays, kids, dinners, forgiveness. Even Uncle Harlan changed. He sold his mansion and moved into a smaller house closer to downtown. "I don't need marble floors to feel like somebody anymore," he told me one afternoon when I visited. "Your grandfather carried shame in silence. I'm not doing that. Not ever again." He spent most of his time managing the legal aid foundation he started. It became surprisingly successful, helping small business owners fight off the same kind of corruption that had nearly destroyed Grandpa decades earlier. I could tell it gave him peace. Bryce stayed clean. His foundation, the Ashford Project for Crime Victims, started gaining national attention. He even gave a talk at a high school once, warning teenagers about the emptiness of greed. I watched the clip online. He said, "I thought wealth was freedom. But it's not. Character is." That line hit me hard because it was exactly the kind of thing Grandpa used to say. And then there was Molly. She had become a completely different person. No filters, no hashtags, no stage lights. She worked quietly at a counseling center helping families through trauma. One day she sent me a photo, a group of kids painting in art therapy. The caption read, "He finally made me see what real influence means." As for me, I stayed at McKinley Elementary still teaching 5th graders. My life wasn't flashy, but it was full. The school gave me purpose, the students gave me hope. Every time I looked at their faces, I thought about how easily money can twist people if they never learn what truly matters. That was the lesson Grandpa wanted to pass on, not just to his family but to everyone his story reached. On weekends, I'd go home and help my parents with the scholarship program. We called it the Cornelius Fund for Purpose-Driven Education. It offered full tuition support to students whose parents worked in teaching, healthcare, or community service, people who chose passion over paycheck. The first time we awarded a scholarship, my father cried quietly. He'd be proud, he said. This is the kind of legacy he wanted. Life became peaceful again. No lawyers. No reporters. No competition. Just small, steady good things. I still kept Grandpa's key on my desk at school, right next to my lesson plans. Sometimes, when a student would ask about it, I'd tell them, it's a reminder that real treasure doesn't always shine. They'd smile, confused, but I could tell the message stuck somewhere deep. And every Sunday I still went to the cemetery. Sometimes alone, sometimes with my parents. The flowers always fresh, the chessboard sometimes open. I'd tell Grandpa about how the family was doing, about the lives we were touching, about the peace that finally came after the storm. And though he never answered, the wind always seemed to move through the trees at the exact right moment. Quiet, gentle, like approval. A year passed before I realized how much everything had truly changed. What used to be a family defined by wealth and rivalry had somehow become one connected by purpose. There were still scars, there always are, but there was also something softer now, something closer to love. One Sunday morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sky outside was painted in pale orange and soft blue, the kind of morning Grandpa would have loved. I packed a thermos of coffee, grabbed the same flowers I always brought, and drove to Riverside Cemetery. The air was cool and calm. When I reached his grave, I noticed someone had already been there. A small bunch of fresh white roses rested beside mine, the stems still damp. I smiled. Maybe Bryce had come earlier that morning. Or maybe it was Molly. Either way, it felt right that I wasn't the only one anymore. I sat down on the cold stone bench and poured 2 cups of coffee. One for me, one for him. "Morning, Grandpa," I said softly. "I brought your favorite blend. Thought we'd talk a bit." The cemetery was quiet except for the distant hum of cars and the rustle of wind through the trees. I told him everything. About how the scholarship fund had helped 3 students get into college. About how Bryce had been invited to speak at a community conference. About how Uncle Harlan's legal aid program had saved a small bakery from closing after a corrupt landlord tried to scam them. "You did it, Grandpa," I said quietly. "You gave us all a second chance." For a long while, I just sat there in silence. I thought about everything that had happened. The chaos, the greed, the heartbreak, the discovery of the key. I remembered the way my hands shook when I first pulled it from under his headstone, the way I felt when I opened that bank vault, the way the truth had crushed me and then somehow lifted us all. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the golden key. I still carried it everywhere I went, though it was no longer shiny like before. The engraving 1408 had started to fade slightly, but I could still trace the numbers with my thumb. "You know," I whispered, "I used to think this key opened a vault full of money. Turns out it opened a lesson." The breeze picked up just then, carrying a few golden leaves across the grass. I smiled, taking it as an answer. After finishing my coffee, I walked toward the exit, passing rows of names carved into stone. So many people, so many stories. It hit me then, everyone leaves something behind. Some leave money, others leave pain. But the lucky ones, they leave wisdom. That night back home, I placed the key back on my desk. The light from the lamp reflected softly off its worn surface. I realized that the reason I kept it wasn't because it was valuable, but because it reminded me that strength can be quiet. Sometimes, the truest power doesn't come from fighting harder. It comes from doing what's right when no one's watching. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the key, and whispered the words Grandpa once told me when I was a kid: "Patience wins the game." And this time I finally understood what he meant. 2 years later, on a bright morning in early October, I drove to the cemetery with someone new in the back seat. My son, barely a few months old, bundled in a soft blue blanket. The air smelled like fall, the kind of clean, crisp air that wakes you up from the inside. The trees lining the path were alive with color, deep reds, oranges, yellows, the same kind of beauty Grandpa used to point out when we took drives together years ago. I parked near his grave and stepped out carefully, holding my son close. "You're going to meet your great-grandfather today," I whispered, brushing a tiny leaf from his blanket. His eyes blinked open for a second, bright and curious. For a moment I saw a bit of Grandpa in that look, calm, sharp, and patient. When I reached the grave, I set the baby's carrier down beside the bench and poured 2 cups of coffee like always. The headstone caught the morning light perfectly. The carved words, "He bore his burden with grace and protected those he loved," seemed to glow in the sun. "Hey, Grandpa," I said softly, sitting down. "I brought someone special this time." The wind moved through the trees, rustling the branches like a gentle wave. It almost felt like a response. I smiled. "This is your great-grandson. His name's Michael. Mom and Dad say it suits him." I sat there for a while, talking quietly, about how the scholarship fund had doubled in size, how Bryce's foundation had expanded to Chicago, how Uncle Harlan's organization had helped dozens of small businesses. Even Molly was writing a book now, not about fame or money but about redemption. She called it The Key We Couldn't See. "You'd be proud, Grandpa," I said, adjusting the blanket around Michael. "Everyone's finally doing something good. Something real." My eyes drifted to the chessboard etched faintly into the top of the headstone, a detail we'd added after his second will was fulfilled. The tiny carved pawns and knights shimmered faintly under the sunlight. I remembered that last game I played with him, the day I found the key. His voice still echoed in my mind. The best players don't always attack. Sometimes they just protect the right piece. I took the golden key from my pocket, the same one I'd carried every day since that morning in the vault. It had lost its shine, the surface scratched and worn, but it still held that quiet power. I turned it in my hand, feeling the engraved numbers, 1408. Then I placed it at the base of the headstone beside the coffee cup. "This belongs here," I whispered. "You trusted me to find it. Now it's home." The wind picked up gently, swirling the fallen leaves around us. The moment felt full, like a circle closing. I looked down at my son who was fast asleep and smiled. "You know, Grandpa," I said quietly, "you didn't just leave us money or lessons. You left us peace." As I stood to leave, I felt lighter than I had in years. The guilt, the grief, the anger, all of it stayed behind with the key. What I carried with me was the real inheritance: understanding, strength, and the will to do good even when no one's watching. I strapped Michael into his car seat, gave one last look at the grave and whispered, "Checkmate, Grandpa." Then I drove home under the golden light, the wind chasing us like a quiet goodbye. A few months later, I was sitting at my desk late one evening, grading papers while the baby monitor hummed softly beside me. Michael had fallen asleep hours ago, and the house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. The golden key still rested where it always had, right in front of me between a framed photo of Grandpa and my father's old fountain pen. It had become more than a reminder. It was a symbol of everything we'd lost and found again. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about the journey that had started with a stormy October morning in that law office. I thought about how greed had blinded all of us, how easily we'd let money turn us into strangers. And yet, that same chaos had somehow led us to truth, a painful truth but one that freed us. Grandpa's lesson wasn't about wealth or punishment. It was about character. About what we do when no one is watching. Sometimes when I told the story to close friends or coworkers, they'd shake their heads and say, "I don't think I could have turned it in. $500 million? That's life-changing." I'd smile every time and answer, "It was life-changing, just not in the way you think." Because that's the part most people never understand. Doing the right thing might not make you rich, but it makes you whole. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the faint sound of Michael's breathing through the monitor. My parents were asleep upstairs. The house smelled faintly of coffee and the wooden polish my mother used every Sunday. It was simple, ordinary, and perfect. I picked up the key one more time, holding it under the lamplight. The gold was dull now, but the engraved numbers, 1408, were still clear enough to read. I ran my thumb over them and smiled. "You know, Grandpa," I whispered into the quiet room, "I think I finally get it. The golden key was never the treasure. We were." I placed it back down gently, then opened my laptop. I began typing. Not a letter, not a confession, but a story. Our story. I wanted Michael to have it one day, to know the truth behind the Ashford name, not the scandal or the fortune, but the redemption. The proof that even after decades of silence and secrets, doing what's right can still rewrite everything. When I finished, I saved the file under a simple name, The Lesson. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, soft and steady. Somewhere in that sound, I swore I could hear Grandpa's voice again, the same calm tone he used when teaching me chess. Be patient, kiddo. Every move matters. I smiled, turned off the light, and headed upstairs to check on Michael. He was fast asleep, his small hand curled near his cheek, breathing slow and peaceful. I stood there for a moment, watching him, realizing that this quiet, honest life was worth more than any vault full of gold. Before I left the room, I whispered softly, "One day I'll tell you everything. About the golden key, the lesson, and the man who taught us what real inheritance means." Then I kissed his forehead, turned off the nightlight, and walked out into the silence, carrying with me not guilt or greed but gratitude. Grandpa had been right all along. Real wealth isn't what you leave in the bank. It's what you leave in people. And that, finally, was the end of the Ashford story.